The garage smelled like old paint and sawdust, the kind of smell that clung to the walls of unfinished projects and abandoned good intentions. I stood there, holding a wrench in my hand, staring at the half-assembled bookshelf I had been pretending to work on for the past 30 minutes. Not because I had any particular attachment to the thing. I wasn't exactly a man with a passion for woodworking, but because it gave me a good excuse to be away from Virginia. She had been acting weird, and not the usual weird, like when she got into one of her phases where she suddenly decided she was an expert on something she had only just learned about last week: sourdough baking, homeopathy. That time she tried to convince me we should start composting even though she refused to touch dirt. No, this was different. For the past few months, Virginia had been floating through our house like some kind of ethereal being, half present, half elsewhere. She had developed a habit of laughing a little too hard at nothing, stretching a smile a little too wide when I asked her what was on her mind. If I brought up anything that required more than a yes or no answer, she'd suddenly remember she needed to be anywhere but that conversation. Now, I wasn't one to immediately jump to conclusions. I wasn't paranoid, but I was observant. And what I was observing was a woman who, despite claiming to be exhausted all the time, somehow had boundless energy for anything that didn't involve me. So, I stayed in the garage longer than necessary, pretending to adjust a screw that didn't need adjusting, waiting for the sound of her car pulling out of the driveway. Because that's what she did now, left. Constantly. Virginia was always off somewhere, running vague errands, meeting up with people whose names I had never heard before. And every time she left, she took a little more of herself with her. When I finally walked back into the house, the silence felt heavier than usual. I wandered into the kitchen, my hand automatically going to the fridge, but then I stopped. Something was off. Not in a dramatic, movie-style way. The furniture wasn't overturned, and the walls weren't covered in cryptic messages. But the details were wrong. For one, the vase on the counter was missing. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who notices vases. But this one? It was Virginia's pride and joy. A statement piece, she had called it. She had dragged me halfway across town to some overpriced boutique just to buy the stupid thing. It was an ugly, lopsided piece of ceramic that looked like it had been molded by someone who had never actually seen a vase before. But she loved it. She put fresh flowers in it every week. And now, suddenly, it was gone. I turned slowly, scanning the room. The air felt rearranged. It wasn't that anything was overtly missing besides the vase, but the kitchen had that eerie, just cleaned feeling, the kind where you could tell someone had been there, trying to erase evidence of their presence. And then I saw it. The floor. Or rather, the very deliberate absence of something on the floor. See, Virginia had a bad habit. She always left her shoes near the door, never quite on the mat, never quite in a straight line. She would come home, kick them off without a second thought, and then wander into the house like some kind of liberated woodland creature. Except today, the shoes were neatly placed side by side, which meant she had been here. Recently. Long enough to fix something she had never fixed before. A strange feeling settled in my gut, not quite dread, not quite certainty, but something in between. I turned on my heel and walked to the laundry room, because that's what a man does when he has a sneaking suspicion that his wife is up to something. He checks the laundry, because no matter how careful people are, they always forget about the laundry. And sure enough, there it was. A single, damp towel sitting in the washing machine. Now, a normal person might think, oh, she just did some cleaning. But I had been married to Virginia for 13 years. I knew better. Virginia didn't do spontaneous cleaning. Virginia did performative cleaning. The kind she did loudly and with great fanfare, so she could lecture me about how she was the only one keeping this house from falling apart. But this was different. This was quiet, rushed, almost guilty. And that's when it clicked. The vase. The weirdly clean kitchen. The two neat shoes. Somebody had been here. I closed the washing machine and leaned against it, staring at the wall, letting the pieces fall into place. Virginia had been home, but not alone. I wasn't one for dramatics. I wasn't going to flip the washing machine over or start yelling at the walls. But I did want to know who had been standing in my kitchen, drinking my coffee, walking through my house like they belonged there. And I had a pretty good idea of where to start looking. There are two kinds of people in this world, the ones who don't notice anything, and the ones who notice everything but pretend they don't. I used to think I was in the first category. Turns out, I'm firmly planted in the second. I spent the rest of the day doing what any rational husband does when he realizes his wife might be hiding something. I went about my business like nothing was wrong. I took a shower. I responded to emails. I even sat through one of those mandatory company Zoom meetings where people pretend to care about team synergy while secretly playing on their phones. But my mind kept going back to that missing vase. By the time Virginia got home, I was perched on the couch with a beer, flipping through channels like I had no interest in anything but the possibility of finding an old action movie rerun. She walked in carrying a tote bag that I had never seen before, which was already suspicious, because Virginia treated tote bags like an extension of her personality. If she had a new one, that meant something. "Hey," she said, setting the bag down and slipping off her shoes with a little too much precision. "Hey." I didn't look at her, just kept clicking through channels. I could feel her watching me, waiting. It's funny how you can be married to someone for over a decade and still not know what they're going to say next. Or maybe you do know, but you're hoping they surprise you. Finally, she let out a little sigh, the kind she did when she was about to start one of those sentences that sounded casual but wasn't. "So," she said, "how was your day?" "Terrible. Thanks for asking." "Fine. Yours?" She gave me a tight-lipped smile, the kind you give when someone asks how you are and you don't actually want to answer. "Busy. Busy." That was the word she had been using a lot lately. It was a nice, clean, non-specific word. I nodded, like that explained everything, and took a sip of my beer. "Cool. Hey, where's the ugly vase?" It was subtle, but I saw it. The pause. The tiniest flicker of hesitation before she forced her face back into something neutral. "Oh, I knocked it over by accident. It broke. I didn't even blink." "Really?" She nodded, her shoulders relaxing a little. "Yeah, this morning. I was rushing out, and I bumped it." "Well, that's a shame," I said, taking another sip. "You loved that thing." Her expression flickered again, just for a second. "Yeah, it was a bad lie. Not just because of the way she said it, but because Virginia was not the kind of person who simply knocked things over. If something in our house broke, she usually spent 15 minutes lecturing me on how it was my fault, even if I wasn't in the room when it happened. "So where is it?" I asked, casually flipping through another channel. "What? The vase? Or the pieces, I mean. You didn't just leave them on the floor, right?" Another pause. "No, of course not," she said quickly. "I cleaned it up before I left." I nodded again. "Right. You always say I never clean up after myself. Guess I should take notes." That earned me a thin-lipped smile. "Yeah, maybe you should." There it was again. That weird tension. The careful words. Like she was waiting for me to say something else, to push further. I didn't. Because I didn't need to. She went about her evening like nothing was wrong, and I watched her with the kind of detached curiosity you get when you realize you're seeing someone for who they really are, maybe for the first time. She cooked dinner, humming some song under her breath like a woman who hadn't just lied straight to her husband's face. She scrolled through her phone, tapping out messages to people I wasn't sure existed. She took a long shower, then came to bed smelling like vanilla body wash and distance. And I let it all happen, because I needed to see how long she could keep up the act. The next morning, she was up early. Too early. Virginia was not a morning person. Her natural habitat was the bed, where she would stay curled up until the last possible minute before dragging herself into the day. But today, she was bright-eyed and moving fast, grabbing her bag and keys before I had even made my coffee. "Going somewhere?" I asked, leaning against the counter. "Yeah, I have a thing." "A thing?" "Yeah. Sounds important." She gave me another smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It is." Then she left, and I followed. Now, let's get one thing straight. I'm not proud of what I did. But pride has never been particularly useful when you suspect your wife is sneaking around. So I got in my car and kept a few cars behind her, making sure not to be obvious. I had never done this before, never thought I would need to. But as I watched her turn down streets she had no reason to be on, take a route that made no sense, I realized something. She was trying to be unpredictable, which meant she knew she had something to hide. After about 20 minutes of weird turns and sudden lane changes, she pulled into a parking lot. Not a hotel, not a fancy restaurant, a furniture store. I frowned, watching as she stepped out of the car and smoothed her hair. Then she walked inside like she had a purpose. I sat there, staring. What was she doing? Buying a new vase to cover her lie? That seemed too simple. Too stupid. I waited. 10 minutes. Then 20. She didn't come out. So I made a decision. I was going in. If you ever want to feel completely out of place, walk into a furniture store with absolutely no intention of buying anything. Suddenly, every overenthusiastic salesperson in a 10-mile radius will descend upon you like you're the last customer on Earth, desperate to convince you that what your life is missing is a $3,000 sectional named after some European city. I stepped inside, immediately greeted by the overwhelming smell of brand-new upholstery and fake enthusiasm. A young guy in an ill-fitting polo shirt spotted me from across the showroom and started making his way over, armed with what I could only assume was a memorized sales pitch. Before he could open his mouth, I held up a hand. "I'm good." His face fell slightly, but he nodded and pivoted toward an older couple who looked like they might actually be in the market for an overpriced recliner. Now, the challenge was finding Virginia without making it obvious that I was looking for her. I walked deeper into the store, weaving through an unnecessary number of staged living rooms, all arranged with books that no one had ever read and decorative bowls filled with things that had no business being in a bowl. The whole place was trying way too hard to convince people that if they just bought the right couch, their lives would suddenly fall into place. Then, I saw her. Virginia was standing near a display of bookshelves, nodding along as some guy in a button-up shirt gestured toward a piece of wood like it was the most fascinating thing he had ever seen. She wasn't just listening, she was engaged, leaning in slightly, her head tilted in that way she did when she wanted someone to think she was really interested in what they were saying. The guy, who looked to be in his late 30s, had the kind of haircut that suggested he either spent way too much time styling it or none at all. He had a confident stance, the kind of confidence that came from either being really good at his job or just naturally assuming people should listen to him. I didn't recognize him, which meant one of two things. Either he was a random salesperson trying to get Virginia to commit to a ridiculously overpriced shelf, or he was the reason the vase had mysteriously disappeared from our kitchen. Either way, I wasn't leaving without finding out. I grabbed the closest object to me, a catalog from a side table, flipped it open like I had a reason to be there, and casually moved closer. "It's all about maximizing space without compromising style," the guy was saying, tapping the side of the bookshelf like it had personally changed his life. "And with the additional storage compartments, you're looking at functionality and elegance in one piece." Virginia laughed lightly, that polished, practiced kind of laugh she used in social situations where she wanted to be charming. "I see what you mean. It's definitely well designed." I flipped another page in the catalog, watching out of the corner of my eye as she reached out and ran her fingers along the shelf. Not once in 13 years of marriage had Virginia ever been this enthusiastic about furniture. In fact, I was fairly certain she had once told me, verbatim, that she didn't care about wooden rectangles, and that shopping for furniture was a soul-draining experience. And yet, here she was, acting like this bookshelf was the eighth wonder of the world. "Of course, if you're looking for something more custom, we can arrange that too," the guy added, lowering his voice slightly. Virginia smiled, tucking her hair behind her ear. "That's good to know." That was my cue. I stepped forward, shutting the catalog with a deliberate snap. "Babe, there you are." Virginia stiffened like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice water on her. The guy turned toward me, his polite salesman expression instantly shifting into something less practiced. He looked between me and Virginia, clearly doing some rapid mental calculations. Virginia recovered quickly, pasting on a smile. "Noah, what are you doing here?" "Shopping," I said, holding up the catalog like it was my official reason for existing in that moment. "Apparently, I've been missing out on all the excitement of modern bookshelf technology." The guy cleared his throat, offering me a polite nod. "I was just helping your wife pick out something for the house." "Oh yeah." I looked at Virginia. "Since when are we in the market for a bookshelf?" Virginia's smile tightened. "I was just browsing." "Browsing?" I nodded, flipping the catalog open again. "So, should we go for functional elegance or minimalist sophistication? Because apparently that's the choice we're making here." The guy shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Virginia, who was doing her best to maintain the facade. "Well," the guy said, forcing an upbeat tone, "if you two need any assistance, just let me know. I'll, give you a moment." "Smart man." He walked off, leaving me and Virginia standing there in awkward silence. She crossed her arms. "Did you follow me?" I tilted my head. "If I say no, will you believe me?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't press the question. Instead, she exhaled through her nose and looked away. "What's going on, Virginia?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Nothing." "Right." I tapped the catalog against my hand. "You just suddenly developed a deep passion for home storage solutions." She shifted, clearly trying to decide how much she could get away with. "I was just looking around." "Sure." I gestured vaguely toward the bookshelves. "So, when were you going to tell me we needed one of these?" "I don't know, Noah," she said, irritation creeping into her voice. "I don't consult you on every little thing I do." No, but considering you once called furniture shopping pointless agony, I feel like this is a pretty big shift. She rolled her eyes. Can we not do this here? Why not? Seems like a great place. Well-lit, neutral ground, plenty of witnesses. She let out a short, humorless laugh. You're impossible. And you're lying. She looked up at me sharply. Excuse me. You heard me. I held her gaze, waiting. You're acting weird, Virginia. You've been acting weird for months. And now, you're suddenly interested in a bookshelf. She opened her mouth like she was about to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped her. Instead, she pressed her lips together and looked away. I let the silence stretch between us, giving her the chance to say something, anything, that would make sense. She didn't. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked toward the exit. And I followed, knowing full well that whatever this was, we weren't done. Virginia didn't say a word the entire ride home, which was both expected and completely ridiculous. She had plenty of words when she wanted to tell me how I loaded the dishwasher incorrectly, or how I was incapable of buying the right kind of milk, but now, when I had actual, legitimate questions, she suddenly discovered the beauty of silence. I let her stew in it. We pulled into the driveway, and she was out of the car before I even turned off the engine. Straight into the house, like she had somewhere urgent to be that wasn't this conversation. I took my time following, stepping inside just in time to see her tossing her tote bag onto the kitchen counter like it had personally offended her. Do you want to tell me what that was all about? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't turn around. Nothing. Nothing? I let out a short laugh. Virginia, you were standing in a furniture store, acting like you were personally invested in the emotional well-being of a bookshelf. She spun around, arms crossed. Why do you even care? That was an interesting question. I could have pointed out that she was my wife and that it was completely reasonable for a husband to care when his wife started acting like she had a secret double life. But instead, I said, because you're bad at lying and I enjoy watching you try. Her jaw tightened. I wasn't lying. Oh, so you just randomly decided to redecorate our home, but instead of telling me, you went on a solo mission to a store you claim to hate? I tilted my head. Yeah, that checks out. She exhaled sharply through her nose, grabbing a water bottle from the counter just so she had something to hold. I don't have to explain every little thing I do, Noah. See, normally I'd agree with you. But normally, you don't act like you're starring in a low-budget spy movie. Her grip tightened on the bottle, and for a second, I thought she was going to throw it at me. Instead, she twisted off the cap and took a sip, like she needed to buy time. I watched her, waiting. Finally, she set the bottle down and sighed. Fine. You want to know why I was there? That's kind of the point of this conversation, yeah. She hesitated, and then, in a tone that was way too forced, she said, I was thinking of getting a new desk. I blinked. A desk. Yes. A desk. For what? For working. I stared at her. Virginia, you don't work. She straightened. Excuse me. You don't have a job. I work. She shot back. Just because I don't get a paycheck doesn't mean I don't do things. Right. I nodded slowly. So, tell me, what exactly were you planning to do at this new desk of yours? She opened her mouth, closed it, and there it was. The moment where she realized she hadn't thought this lie through. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Instead, I crossed my arms. You know, I'd love to see a business plan. Maybe get some investors involved. Virginia's imaginary desk corporation. We could go public in a year. She glared at me. You're being ridiculous. No, I think I'm being pretty reasonable. I just want to know why my wife suddenly has a passion for office furniture when the last time I suggested you get a desk, you said. I raised my voice an octave to mimic her. Why would I need a desk when I have the entire couch? Her nostrils flared. You are so annoying. And you are a terrible liar. She grabbed her water bottle again and marched past me, heading toward the bedroom like that was going to end the conversation. I followed. Because if she was going to commit to this ridiculous excuse, then I wanted to see just how far she was willing to take it. She stopped at the dresser, yanking open the drawer where she kept old notebooks and miscellaneous junk that had no other place. Look, she said, grabbing a notebook and flipping it open like it was a piece of evidence in a high-profile trial. I was writing down ideas. I peered over her shoulder. The page was blank. I grinned. Wow, so many ideas. Her whole body tensed. I haven't started yet. Ah, of course. I nodded. Step 1, buy desk. Step 2, stare at it. Step 3, hope productivity magically happens. She slammed the notebook shut. Why are you like this? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because my wife is obviously hiding something and is so bad at covering her tracks that it's almost painful to watch. She exhaled slowly, her fingers gripping the notebook like she wanted to set it on fire. For a moment, I thought she might actually crack. That she might tell me something real, something that would explain all of this. Instead, she closed the drawer, set the notebook down, and turned to me with an expression so carefully blank that it immediately confirmed she was still full of it. I don't know what you think is going on, she said, voice controlled. But I went to a furniture store because I wanted to. That's it. I studied her. Okay, I said. That threw her off. Okay. Yeah, I shrugged. If you say that's all it was, then sure. Who am I to question my loving wife? Her eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't believe me. Good. I gave her one last look, then walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, gripping the edge of the dresser like she needed to steady herself. Because here was the thing, she thought she had one. She thought that because I dropped it, I had given up. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Virginia thought she was clever. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was underestimating just how much free time I was willing to dedicate to proving a point. For the next few days, I let things settle. I acted like the whole furniture store incident was behind us, like I had simply accepted her ridiculous explanation and moved on. I went through my usual routines, let her believe that she had one, that I was just some clueless husband who had momentarily gotten too nosy for his own good. Meanwhile, I was gathering intel, because Virginia had no idea that, years ago, before marriage turned me into a responsible adult, I had a brief but memorable phase where I spent way too much time learning how to dig up information on people. It started as a harmless curiosity, a skill picked up from late-night rabbit holes on internet forums. I never had a real reason to use it. Until now. Step 1 was easy. I checked our shared cloud storage. Virginia, for all her supposed secrecy, was terrible at digital security. She never logged out of anything, never bothered to delete old documents. And there it was, buried in a folder labeled Receipts. A recent purchase. Not a bookshelf. Not a desk. A phone. A second phone. A device she had no reason to own, no explanation for. And since I had nothing better to do that afternoon, I decided to track it down. See, Virginia wasn't a tech person. She barely knew how to operate our thermostat, which meant, when she activated the new phone, she probably did it right here in the house on our Wi-Fi. And our Wi-Fi logs? Those were mine to access. It took all of 10 minutes. The phone had connected 3 days ago. A brand new number, one that didn't show up on any of our shared accounts. But the real jackpot was when I cross-checked the data with her call history on our carrier account. Virginia had been very, very busy, and she wasn't talking to old college friends. The number she had been in constant contact with belonged to a man named Eric Foster. Now, who was Eric Foster? Well, that's where things got interesting. Eric Foster was married, had 2 kids, worked in real estate. And this was the part that really made me appreciate the irony. He was our neighbor. Not next door, but close enough. Just a few streets over. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, letting that sink in. She was cheating on me with a guy who lived in the same neighborhood, who shopped at the same grocery store, who probably smiled and waved at me in passing while secretly scheduling meetups with my wife. I almost had to respect the audacity. But mostly, I was just insulted. Not by the cheating itself. I mean, sure, that was obviously a problem, but by the sheer lack of effort. If you're going to betray your spouse, at least put some creativity into it. This was just lazy. And if there was one thing I couldn't stand, it was laziness. So, I came up with a plan. A very public, very humiliating plan. It took me a couple of days to set things in motion. First, I made a few calls. Some to real estate offices, pretending to be an interested buyer. Others to Eric Foster's workplace, confirming his schedule. I even managed to casually ask another neighbor about him, just to see if anything interesting would come up. Turns out, Eric had a bit of a reputation. Not just for being a smooth talker, but for being a guy who cut corners. Someone who played fast and loose with contracts, who made a habit of pushing legal boundaries just far enough to make money, but not far enough to get caught. Until now. I made sure of that. Because, in addition to my recent deep dive into cyber sleuthing, I also had another advantage, my job. See, I worked in finance. More importantly, I worked in auditing, which meant I knew exactly what kind of mistakes to look for when someone was trying to play dirty. And Eric Foster? Oh, he had plenty. A few anonymous tips later, and let's just say his career was about to take a very unexpected turn. But that wasn't the main event. No, the main event was much better. I waited until Virginia had another one of her errands. Then, I sent Eric a text. From her second phone. Meet me at the house. Husband's out. I could only imagine how fast he jumped at that opportunity. Meanwhile, I set the stage. A few strategically placed cameras. A couple of well-timed social media posts. And the piece de resistance, an invitation. To Eric's wife. I had debated whether to involve her. But then I figured, why should I be the only one having fun? So there we were, me and Eric's wife, parked a few houses down, watching as he pulled into my driveway, all confident and eager. The moment he stepped inside, I gave it exactly 30 seconds before I activated the house speakers and played a pre-recorded message. Virginia. Eric. Congratulations. You've both won an all-expenses-paid trip to complete and utter humiliation. I wish I could have seen their faces. But the real fun was what came next. Because, as planned, at that exact moment, Eric's wife burst through the front door. And let's just say, she had some things to say. I stayed outside, listening as the yelling began, watching as Eric tried, and failed, to explain himself. Virginia? Well, she didn't say much. Because what was there to say? She had lost. And me? I walked away, whistling, knowing that by the time the dust settled, I would be free. And they? They would be nothing but a cautionary tale. Virginia wasn't home when I got back. Neither was any of her stuff. The bedroom closet had been raided, drawers left half open, a few empty hangers swinging in the space where her clothes used to be. A suitcase was missing from the top shelf. I stood there, looking at the aftermath, and let out a low whistle. That was fast. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Not even a passive-aggressive text demanding an explanation for why her side piece's life had suddenly gone up in flames. Honestly, I was a little insulted. You'd think she'd have something to say after getting publicly exposed and watching Eric's wife nearly take his head off in our living room. But then again, Virginia had always been good at one thing, running away from responsibility. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed a soda from the fridge, sat down at the table, stretched my legs out, and took a long, satisfied sip. It was over, and I had one. Eric, from what I had heard through the ever-reliable neighborhood gossip pipeline, had an even worse night than Virginia. His wife had kicked him out, trashed his car with what I could only assume was an impressive amount of rage, and, thanks to my anonymous tip about his shady real estate dealings, he was about to have a very uncomfortable conversation with his employers. Meanwhile, I was sitting in my house, in my chair, drinking my soda, enjoying the silence. It was a beautiful thing. Then the doorbell rang. I didn't rush to answer it. I finished my drink first. Then I stretched, yawned a little, and finally made my way over, already having a good guess about who would be standing on the other side. I opened the door. Virginia. She looked like she had been put through a washing machine set on regret. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were red, and she had that dazed expression people get when reality finally hits them like a brick to the face. Noah, she said, her voice hoarse, like she had been crying. I leaned against the doorframe. Oh, hey, Virginia. Something wrong. She blinked at me like she couldn't quite believe I was acting this casual. Can we talk? Sure, I said. We talking like normal people, or are you going to try and convince me that you actually wanted a bookshelf again? She flinched, her hands tightening around the strap of her purse. I know I messed up. I gave her a slow, unimpressed nod. Yup. She exhaled shakily. I don't even know where to start. Would you like some help? I offered, crossing my arms. How about, Noah, I'm sorry I cheated on you with an extremely mediocre real estate agent who now has to figure out how to explain fraud charges to his lawyer. Virginia swallowed hard. Or maybe, Noah, I deeply regret treating my husband like a fool when, in reality, he was 5 steps ahead of me the entire time. She closed her eyes for a second, like she was bracing herself. I wasn't thinking. Oh, I believe that, I said. That part is very clear. Her shoulders slumped. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know what to do. I stared at her for a long moment. And then, finally, I shrugged. Not my problem. She flinched again, like she hadn't been expecting that. Noah, please. Please what? I asked. Please forget everything? Pretend you didn't spend the last few months sneaking around like a teenager with bad judgment? Sorry, Virginia, but I have better things to do with my time. Her lip trembled. You don't even want to talk about it? I gave her a long, slow look. What part of this situation do you think still requires talking? She looked lost. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I didn't feel responsible for fixing that. You made your choices, I said, stepping back. And now, you get to live with them. Her breath hitched. So that's it. That's it. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something else. One last plea, one last excuse, but nothing came out. Finally, she just nodded, turned, walked away. I shut the door. And just like that, Virginia was out of my life. The divorce was easy. I had more than enough evidence to make sure things went my way. She didn't fight me on anything. Probably too embarrassed, too defeated. I kept the house. She moved out of town. Eric? Well, last I heard, he was living in a cheap rental and scrambling to find new work, since no one in real estate wanted to touch him after the mess I created. As for me, I was good. Really good. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was happy. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel